Bam! What is going on, folks? Turn some stuff off here. All right. What's going on? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chem, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I do this every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and I get on, talk about some stuff. Usually have a topic at hand. In my email, I send out some talking points for that topic, just to give me a framework, general framework for where the talk can go. Always looking to obviously get participation and interaction from those of you that are hanging out with me. That being said, let's see what we got going on here. Jesse, what's going on? Good to see you, my friend. Big Joe, what's up? Sean, what's up? My man Jamie up in Canada. Hello to you. Corey, good to see you. All right, I'm glad everybody's hanging out. Got a lot of the regulars, which I like. So let's do this. Start off the housekeeping. If you have not yet gone to masterchem.com and put in your email to the email newsletter box, the form, you get a free email every day because of it. I talk about different things. Did I mention free? I don't give away emails or anything like that. I'll be honest, I don't even know how to freaking do it. Not that I would if I did. But aside from that, now, because of the upgrades I made to the masterchem.com site, you could also get a promo code for a free balance management system, my balance management system called Master the 24-Hour Cycle. It is the framework that I use to design every single day of my life. I made it into a video series, and you don't got to follow all of it, but I'm sure there's going to be some things here and there that you could pick and choose and enhance your level of productivity and balance as a result. All you need to do is go to the website and put your email in the opt-in box for the newsletter, and an email will be sent to you with that promo code that you can go and get the program for free. I think at this point, everybody knows how this stuff works, right? So I don't have to explain everything there. Stellan, good to see you. Big Matt, what's up, brother man? All right, good. So today's topic, the weaknesses of competition. The weaknesses of competition. Now, I'm somebody who thinks competition is mandatory for every man. It's not that it's not mandatory for every woman. I just don't talk to you guys like that. You guys can figure some stuff out on your own. By guys in this context, I mean ladies. But, my crew are the guys that are there trying to navigate this journey of life in the most powerful way possible. So I do think that competition is mandatory. But it's hard to say, that it's mandatory on one end and then lead the topic or title the topic of this talk with the weaknesses of competition. But there are many weaknesses. I think there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to competitions. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. Johnny Groove, what's going on, man? Brother man, good to see you. All right, so let's start off with the list that I put in this morning's email to get this party started. And we're going to start off with the pros of competition. In other words, the strengths of competition. The talk today is on the weaknesses, but let's add a little context by first starting with the other side of the equation, which are the strengths, the assets, the values of what competition could bring to an individual. So competition, and I guess this is a short list of why I think competition is mandatory, as I mentioned earlier. Number one, pressure. In competition, you are going to expose yourself to pressure that you may not be exposed to in any other area of your life. Now, one could say, well, if I'm going to a jiu-jitsu competition, a little biased, obviously, you go to a jiu-jitsu competition, I run a accounting firm, an accounting business. What does one thing have to do with another? And I would say one of the commonalities of almost every application of competition is what that pressure in that given realm of competition, what that does for the individual and his relationship with himself, right? So if you've read my book, TRIBALNOMICS, if you've followed any of my other programs, the Alliance Trivium, the Loyalty Matrix, one of the things that I am a tremendous advocate for is what I label self-alliance. Basically, the alliance that one has with the ideal form of himself. In the book, I articulate it as being a pure self, which is a snapshot in time, what you think the flawless you looks like. It's an abstraction. It's not a real thing, which segues into the other thing that you are building the alliance with, which is the real self. Self-alliance is the alliance, the friendship, the partnership between the flawless you, pure self, and the everyday you, in reality, the real self. So in competition, then, what I see as a tremendous benefit is the pressure forces you to actually figure out who you are, where you balk, all the things that without that pressure, you'd be willing to say to somebody else with sincerity that, you would do. I would do this. In this situation, I would do this. I believe that if I was here, I would do this. Or you've been even critical of other people where that's concerned. Why is he doing that? Why shouldn't he do this? Yet you have never been in that type of situation to sort of deal with the maybe unseen pressure that the individual is dealing with. Well, one of the things about competition is that it will put you in that pressure. It will have you feel the gravity of a situation in ways that you may have never felt before. And in turn, or as a result, you will learn more about yourself than had you not been exposed to that process. The next thing, positive, pros, value of competition, is you start exposing yourself to the transference of knowledge in the form of, well, many forms, but specifically to what I wanted to share was the mentor apprentice dynamic, right? Somebody knows a way to do something. You want to know how to do that thing. You go and expose yourself to the guidance and mentorship from that individual. And as a result, you wind up not having to rediscover or redevelop formulas that have already been discovered and developed by people that have come before you. Sometimes competition is the first environment whereby an individual is seeking guidance on specific formulas to sort of streamline or at least shorten the process of him becoming more accomplished or climbing the ladder in that given realm of competition. If I am somebody who wants to learn jujitsu, as 20-something years ago I went and sought out people who knew more than I did. And I exposed myself to them sharing those formulas with me. And I built a relationship with those formulas until I made them my own. And so the cycle continues. Well, wanting to compete, be competitive, is one of the things that drives that in an individual. And somebody who's never exposed himself to competition may not have had that same drive, right? The last thing I'm going to go over, there's certainly more than just these three that I'm going over. The last thing I'm going over is the rules. Now, the rules I would call allows one a level of focus in the form of a boxed thinking that an individual may not expose himself to otherwise. So what do I mean by that? When you have to succeed, you have to accomplish a mission within or according to a set number of criteria, it forces you to think strategically. It forces you to sort of figure things out without the full use of your creativity, your experiences, your resources. You have to figure it out given this restricted set of criteria. That boxed thinking will allow somebody to sort of figure something out according to what it is that they're figuring out. They will sort of solve a puzzle according to what solutions the puzzle requires, as opposed to the guy who figuratively shows up with a hammer on a job site thinking everything's a nail. if you were to think of, for a second, I'll use the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. And let's say there is a picture of, I don't know, Mount Rushmore, right? I don't know. The subconscious just throws shit in my head. So Mount Rushmore, and it's in 10,000 pieces. Well, the solution to this jigsaw puzzle is the completion of the image that was originally cut up into a jigsaw puzzle. If I say, well, I'm going to solve this jigsaw puzzle by making it at the end, putting the pieces together and making an image of my choosing, then I am disconnected from the criteria that particular competitive situation requires, right? There is one solution, and I have to find it. And boxed thinking in the form of rules is something that people need to develop if they are going to harness the skills of a problem solver, right? It doesn't take a lot of people to become, it doesn't take a lot of work, I should say, for people to become effective problem seers, right? Or problem listers, right? Problem sayers. But problem solvers, however, they're somebody who represents solutions and the way out, not just yet another way of snapshotting the current scenario that people find themselves in from time to time. So again, that last part of the pros or the values of competition, that boxed thinking. How do I focus within the restrictive scenario of a rule set to come up with the solutions that this particular problem requires? Okay. What's up, Chris? Big Joe Crustle, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. All right, let's go on to the next one right after I take a sip from Monster, who is never sponsoring my videos, but I'm putting some executives' kids through college with it. All right. So the second point that I brought up, how rules change minds. M-I-N-D-S. I don't know if my New York accent sort of sabotages one's ability to hear me pronounce and enunciate that word. Minds. How rules change minds. Well, before, in the last point that I had brought up, I mentioned boxed thinking. Well, now as we get into where competition goes awry, I'm now going to talk about boxed identities. There's something to be said for the fragile nature of an identity that is the product of a box that was handed to him. What does that mean? When you are in competition, you are given a set of criteria, as previously mentioned, that represents the path of your success. This is how you win. Well, we need to understand that the path of success in that given box of criteria does not represent who we are as an individual. Where do we see this go sideways with people? Well, in an older power program that I made called Mind Killers, I talked about these sort of biases that individuals had that I've observed over the years. And one of them I coined the vacuum cleaner, right? Now, the vacuum cleaner is an individual who, because of his inability usually to control his life and control his ecosystem, will reduce the ecosystem and the landscape of his life to a smaller subset of his reality in the form of what I call a vacuum, right? And in this vacuum, he makes sure that everything is perfect. In other words, in the vacuum, he makes sure he is always winning. Well, in a boxed identity that sometimes competition can drive an individual to develop, they do create that vacuum. And the vacuum is created as a result or a reflection of the criteria of the competition they're in. Now, where does this go sideways? You know, as I mentioned before, well, number one, you start to ignore the offset of who the individual is. What constitutes the identity gets lost when an individual allows the competitive box and criteria to overlap who he is, losing himself in the process. What are some examples of that? A quick off the top of my head example, you'll see a lot of young bodybuilders having just incredibly significant health issues, some of them even dying, heart issues, etc., because of a drive they have to excel at this sport that I would say objectively really does not represent the reward or return on investment that their sacrificed and desired investment represents. The juice ain't worth the squeeze when you're 22 years old and you're taking so much shit, your piss is glowing in the dark, and you somehow want to win this, local regional bodybuilding competition that at the end of it, you get a fucking trophy that cost the promoter $14 to make, and you're ready to kill yourself over it. Or even worse yet, you want to be the most competitive person physique-wise on the beach during the summer. These sort of vacuum cleaner-esque type of mindsets is a very, very detrimental process for an individual to have. If the mission or the goal is to preserve the identity that exists outside of that box, right? So in the vacuum cleaner scenario, you have the snapshot or the subset of the entire landscape of an individual's life, where they just focus on this and they try to make it perfect, because then that allows them the control that they need, or maybe it keeps away the insecurities that they expose themselves to and experience otherwise. Whatever the motivation is, they create this smaller subset of reality. Well, sometimes people who compete to the point of developing a boxed identity not only have that happen, but they also have a box that's designed by somebody else. It's designed by somebody else's rules. I'll use the bodybuilding analogy. I'll continue to use that. In bodybuilding, you have there was phases over the years, and there's a point where it was almost like strongman type of bodybuilders, 50s, maybe 40s, 50s, and eventually people started learning that if they take certain pills, their body responds certain ways. Then you started seeing a lot of people moving away from the aesthetics, or a little bit more, just above average level of muscle on these still aesthetic frames. And then as I guess the pharmaceutical aspect of the sport developed, people just started getting more and more cartoonish, and they sort of disconnected themselves from what those root or fundamental, principles were of bodybuilding all those years prior. The aesthetics and, what an aesthetic physique meant changed over time based on what people could do to their bodies. Well, there's a certain point where, as if an individual was competing in a time where there had to be a symmetry in his physique. And by the way, I'm half talking out of my ass, because whereas I have competed in bodybuilding, I didn't compete very well, and I'm not really connected to the sport that I have an educated opinion on today's bodybuilding criteria. But just as an analogy, if you have, an individual who is competing, and it's been expressed to him that a symmetrical physique is what is desired, and then he begins to develop his physique according to that criteria, and then the judging criteria changes, and this has happened over time, where now it's not so much symmetry. They still want symmetry, but the priority is now size, overall size of muscles. So now these individuals that were trying to maintain a certain amount of symmetry now have to try and preserve that symmetry while getting much, much bigger. Completely different mission. And their identity is along for the ride that is being led by those individuals who are controlling the rules, right? So when you are somebody who has this boxed identity, you are pursuing engineered goals. And those engineers are always other people. And those other people may not even know who the individual is, let alone be an advocate for their success, right? So this is where people, will lose themselves. So where to draw the line is the next point. that I brought up, where to draw the line. And this isn't a bodybuilding talk, but using that to illustrate some of these concepts that I'm talking about. I could just as easily talk about jiu-jitsu competition. I could talk about running competitions. It doesn't really matter. Art competition, it doesn't matter. When we start to lose who we are because of this boxed thinking, maintained so long that it develops into a boxed identity, and you suffer or at least expose yourself to all the vulnerabilities that I just mentioned, how do we avoid that? Where do we draw the line? Well, here's the easy answer. Never get in the box. Never get in the box. If you see the thumbnail that I generated, I'm not going to say, made, I generated using Midjourney today. I literally, the prompt for that was two men fighting to get into a box. And it was representative of this last point that I'm making, or at least the next point. I got one more after this. And it's never getting in the box. It's if we're competing, it's not that we're not trying to beat the other individual in the game we are competing for, but that is just the immediate application of our efforts. It's what the purpose of this entire ritual is that we need to stay connected to. There's a point where when I started jiu-jitsu, I did my first competition in like 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever it was. It was less than 2 weeks that me starting that I went to a competition. And I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I won 2 matches just by tackling people, right? I had some wrestling background. In the third match, I got armbarred. I didn't know what an armbar was. I didn't tap. I screamed. And when I screamed, and the ref stopped the match, I held my arm and I immediately looked at the guy and I was like, what the fuck was that? And I was excited. And he was like, oh, it's an armbar. I was like, oh, that was awesome. I was oblivious to what was going on. So when I first started, competition to me was not really about the other guy. As I continued to become more competitive, you start seeing a lot of the same people. You start I remember a couple of friends I competed against. I knew their games. I knew they knew my games. A couple of bigger competitions that I was in, I did do some research. All right, what is this guy probably going to do? Where do I need to stay away from? And it really started becoming about the individual. But there's a certain point where, and I've told this story before, when my wife became pregnant with our first child, with our oldest son, Hayden, all my competitive drive, it was like a switch. I had no desire to compete in MMA, no desire to compete in jiu-jitsu. I'll compete in jiu-jitsu again eventually. MMA, I probably, that ship's probably passed. But for me, competition when I was competing represented how I moved myself up the ladder. But then my wife, expecting our first child and me now having to provide, the idea of having to provide for my family just completely engulfed any identity that I had as a competitor. It's like, no, now the competition is back to life. It's back to, I need to work on my life goals because I'm going to have a baby that needs to eat food that my efforts produce the resources to purchase. So it's never getting in the box. You'll see guys that will go and compete, and they will do so at the detriment of their marriage, at the detriment of their relationship with their children, the detriment of the relationship with their families. And I would just ask, when it's all said and done, is that the story that you want to have written? Now, mind you, there is, I'll take Michael Jordan as an example. Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player to ever play basketball. It's a good argument to be had. What was he like as a husband? I don't know. Was he on his second, third marriage? What was he like a father? I don't know. I don't know much about his children. They're probably well off. I know that. But aside from that, I don't know. And I'm not saying that he was a good father, a bad father, probably not the greatest husband considering his track record. But when you think of Michael Jordan, nobody's going to define him that way. except the people that are affected by it, right? So when you have, and I'll use Michael Jordan's first wife as an example. I don't know these people, obviously. I'm just, illustrating the point with a real world example. When people ask her about Michael Jordan, I don't know. Is she going to say, oh, yeah, he was the greatest basketball player ever lived? She's going to have a different perspective. And she might say, like, nice guy, we were in love, we were married, didn't work out, and it all worked out for the best. She might say, fuck that dude. I hope he gets fucking run over by a car today. I don't fucking know. But no matter how she reacts, she's not going to react the way somebody who looks at him, who actually like values basketball. I know plenty about basketball. I don't really value basketball like a fan of basketball does. But you ask somebody who knows who he is in that context. Oh, what do you know about Michael Jordan? Oh, greatest basketball player ever lived, or something to that effect. So you have two different perspectives. You have the perspective and the opinion therefore of the ex-wife, and then you have the corresponding perspective and opinion of the fan. Now, the whole thing is, who's right, who's wrong? They're both right. It's a subjective, question to even ask what these people think in the first place. But the point of it is, which one does Michael Jordan want to value? And is he living his life in accordance with those expectations and goals? Does Michael Jordan, is he content with the efforts of his life being he was the greatest basketball player in history? Or does he still want his wife and children to look at him as an incredible husband and father? That's up to him. All I'm advocating for is a congruence between the two, right? So when you have people that get in the box of competition, there is a certain point where they stop addressing and therefore maintaining their obligations to those alliances that exist outside of the box. Now, there was a certain point, in my own history, I was trying out for the Ultimate Fighter show, right? And I auditioned for season 6. And when I auditioned for season 6, I made it to the final 20 participants. I was in Vegas. I got interviewed by the producers and stuff, and I got sent home. I told the story before, but it's relevant here. I got sent home as, you guys are the final 20. 16 of you are going to be on the show. 4 of you are going to be alternates. I figured it's a shoo-in, 80%. I thought I gave a great interview. I'd already had a couple of fights. I was, whatever, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. I thought I was in. Got a call from one of the producers. I'm an alternate. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? She told me, like, listen, if somebody gets injured the first 2 days, there's a good chance you'll get called and you'll be brought into the house, because that's what they were doing back then. Well, somebody did get injured. But who was the person that got the spot instead of me? One of the other 4 alternates. And it was the fighter War Machine, right? John, whatever the fuck his last name was. So War Machine is the one that got the spot that I wanted, right? Because he was obviously higher on the alternate list than I was. So that's how War Machine got on the show, by the way. Well, when I didn't make season 6, when I had all my eggs in that basket at that time, my wife was already, I think my son was already born at that point. And it was like, I will give this a go because I saw a financial, benefit to pursuing this. When I didn't make the show, I wasn't going to start grinding and becoming the pro MMA guy to eventually make it to the UFC. Like, I had already seen at that point, like, no, going the long way, I'm not going to meet my financial obligations. So I decided to not compete in MMA anymore. I made that decision. I started going to business events. I started learning how to make more money. Well, fast forward a few months, I don't know, less than a year later, I get a call from the same producer. Now, the same producer calls me, and she tells me that, hey, Justin, and I believe her name was Jamie, very nice lady, producer for the show, The Ultimate Fighter. This is when it was on Spike TV. And she goes, I have great news. And I didn't know what news Jamie, the producer from The Ultimate Fighter, could have for me that I would consider to be great. Somebody, you made a bet by accident when you were in Vegas and, there's $1 million they forgot to give you. Like, I didn't understand. But what she wound up telling me was season 7 is going to be different from season 6. Season 7, people are going to fight to get a spot in the house. And you are in. You are guaranteed a spot to fight to get into the house. So either, you fight, you win, you're in the house and you're on for the whole season, or you fight and you're on the first and maybe even second episodes. So you'll definitely be on the show. And I said, I'm not interested. No, thank you. And she didn't understand my response. She said, no, Justin, you don't understand. Like, there's no audition. There's no, like, you have a spot. I just need you to say, okay. And I'll give you the itinerary, and you get your travel documents and whatever. And this is, you'll have time to get on weight and whatever. And I said, Jamie, I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm so grateful that you thought of me when this came up, but I've already moved on mentally. See, here's the thing about MMA. I wanted at one point to be a UFC fighter. I wanted to be, a world champion like every, budding UFC guy, but I never got in the box. So competition was a tremendous asset for me when developing who I am as an individual, my relationship with myself, the relationship that I have with pressure, with pain, with going without, resources and still getting the job done, with working with others, with getting feedback and being coachable. Competition, I could attribute all those positive aspects of who I am to me developing. Without competition, I would not have those things. Certainly not at the levels that I do now. But I never got in the box. I never forgot who I was aside from that, right? So the last point for this, and what's up, Willie? Caceres, what's up, brother, man? Sean Gillen, good to see you, brother. Grateful for you as well. Hope you're well. The last point that I brought up in the email this morning is, if not that, then what? If competition at some point becomes the thing that you shouldn't be doing, well, what's the alternative? Well, I'm not willing to say that there's ever going to be something that replaces competition. It's just, what competition are you engaged in? I think that speaks more to the point of what I would convey, right? So I have a system of how I advocate a man live, and that is what's labeled the 3 roads. And I'm not going to get into all the specifics of what that is. But the 3 main tenets of 3 roads is the individual, right? An individual's ability to benefit from and construct the best alliances that he can in the form of leadership, right? So it's the self. There is the identity at the level of self. There is leadership, where alliance is concerned. And then there's profit, or, what does profit represent and signify? The return on investment of one's efforts, right? So it could be the productivity of an individual. It could be, I put this energy out there and I get more back in the form of a synergistic outcome, which I would call the profit of the effort. And with this excess or surplus generated resources, I could make me and the people connected to me stronger and more successful. I could build a more powerful identity and more powerful people that are connected to me, the more my efforts generate the resources to do that. And that is what that 3rd road represents. So what is the point of that? How do we marry that idea of 3 roads to my criticisms of what competing to a dysfunctional level represents? It's the balance that we should be anchored to. When I say, never get in the box, what is it that I'm speaking about in everyday decision making? It's never lose who you are and what's important to you, no matter what it is that you're doing. It's not to say that you can't work at some level of intensity and focus where all the other aspects of your life fall by the wayside for this sort of flow state, laser-like focus, and like, yeah, we work on creating those bouts over and over again. And we were just talking about it earlier in my mastermind Zoom call this morning, me and the fellas. So yeah, being able to focus, and achieve that sort of flow state is obviously something that's a good thing, but never at the expense of our identity, right? We never get in the box. Right? We don't live in the box, right? What is the vacuum cleaner? Is the individual that not only gets in the box that somebody handed him, he gets in the box and then he closes himself in. And then he says, all there is in the entirety of my life is in this box and nothing else exists. Therefore, it can't matter. And that's when people are disconnected from what actually means something. I used the example earlier of Michael Jordan. And when all said and done, was it more important for him that fans of basketball call him a great, if not the greatest basketball player? Or was it more important for him that his children say he was the greatest father he could have been? Or, and I'm guessing not, because I think he's on a second or third marriage, have his wife look at him and say, I married the best husband possible. And he was a great husband. Like, it's up to him to decide at the end of the day what it is that he wants to be known for. Because I think that the answer to that reflects what he should be sort of driving his efforts toward. Just using basketball as a continued example, there are plenty of people who played basketball at a high level, made a lot of money, and took that money and wound up having entirely different lives after they made a bunch of money playing basketball. So to them, they never got in the box. Right? They made as much as they could. They basically accumulated and collected all the resources they could out of their efforts in that particular sport. But then they took it, not ever losing who they were, and they took those resources and invested it into their life and the areas of their lives that actually mattered to them. So the weaknesses of competition, I think we covered them. I think we got them down. I'm a staunch advocate for competition, but I am strongly opposed to those people who lose their identity in pursuit of it. I think everybody should be competing, but I think sometimes just the natural ebbs and flow of our lives has us competing in different things and in different ways, and oftentimes as different individuals. Who I was and my focus when I was 25, like I was young, stupid, and, didn't know anything about anything at 25, like most 25-year-olds. And I could say at 48, I'm at least a little further along, right? So what my goals are going to evolve. But if I had gotten into a box a long time ago, who's to say, what type of restriction I would have tried to develop, underneath, and the losses that not only my life would have incurred as a result, but the people that are connected to me. I coach a lot of men in their relationships with their families, and I ask them, when your children look at you, do they look at you as a hero? Do they have a conversation with you where they have an opinion on things because they trust you with their opinion? When a child shares an opinion with you on something, it's like they're opening themselves up and giving you something, and there's a vulnerability there. Do they trust you enough to do that? Are they strong enough to do it with you and other people? Like, how we relate to individuals and how we affect those around us. Like, those are the things that we should be tracking and paying attention to, not with this subset of rules that some disconnected identities, generated as a means to succeed in a way that has nothing to do with who you are as an individual, right? They weren't trying to make men better men and society a better society when they drummed up these rules. They're trying to make a competitive game. There's plenty of benefits to that, as I described, but never at the expense of one's identity. Felix Mendez, my man. What's up? Good to see you, brother. Joe Rotundo writes, the most important thing I learned from applying martial arts to real life is to pick your spot. Timing beats speed most of the time. And, it's a great, observation and analogy to apply, obviously beyond martial arts, that there is timing. And I think from an individual standpoint, wanting to be somebody you no longer are and trying to take advantage of the opportunities that former version of you had will leave you sort of chasing your tail for a long, long time. I know guys that they spend, and I know because at some point they invested in working with me, just an incredible amount of money or an incredible percentage of their, resources to become wealthy, to become a successful entrepreneur, a successful business owner. And there's a certain point where it's like you come to the realization as a mentor for them. It's like, oh, you really don't want the outcome. You just want the chase. You just want to keep going to these seminars. You want to keep reading the books. You want to keep applying the shiny new objects and the new cutting edge strategies, the new secrets. Like some of these people know more fucking secrets than a god would, with all the secrets that they've spent to learn in all these different areas of life, and I think when somebody's really gotten the timing of their efforts down, a very prominent attribute of that individual is an understanding of who they are at that time, Yarn Saxa, good to see you. Little late, but I'll allow it. All right. So I think we covered this. We covered this pretty well. Covered all the bases. Let me just finish up by reminding people, if you have not gone to masterchim.com and signed up for the emails, you are not only missing out on free emails every day, but you're also missing out on the promo code to acquire my Master the 24-Hour Cycle program. And it's usually $47. Listen, if you just want that, but you want to get off the list, after that, then feel free. I don't give a shit. I got thousands of people on that list. If you want to go and get the program and then unsubscribe, like, more power to you. I hope you benefit. Rockstar, I'm going to share this before I read it. Not to sound corny, or better said, extra corny, but the first time I competed was 2 weeks after my first class with you. I was scared, but it was the responsibility of my balls not to show any fear. Thank you for continuously showing day one and never be affected. And that's where I get banned. And that's the moral of the story today, brought to you by Rockstar. Corey, you got it, my man. I'll see you next week. Chris, thanks for hanging out. All right, guys, I'm going to end it there. I appreciate you. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.